We have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Congratulations to GB News Breakfast, voted by you as the nation's best multi-channel news programme at the prestigious Trick Awards.
Good evening, fellow travellers. Welcome along to Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on radio. Coming up on the show this evening, I'll be joined by Ralph Scholhammer to talk about the current situation in Europe and discussing how governments there are land grabbing. We'll also be talking to Dr. Callum Miller about a new investigation into claims autistic or intellectually disabled people have been allowed to be euthanised in the Netherlands. And we will also be joined by Snakey Sue and her rather large pet snake Retsy to talk about the rising numbers of escaped snakes in the UK. Yes, you heard that right. All of that, plus plenty of chat with my brilliant, lovely panellist, Jasmine Birtles. But first, an update on the latest news from Rhiannon Jones. Thank you, Neil. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. A funeral has been held for the teenager who was shot dead by police on Tuesday, sparking riots across France.
The Interior Ministry has said that more than 1,300 people were arrested overnight as violence continues to spread across the country. Buildings and vehicles were torched and stores looted by protesters demanding justice for the 17-year-old known as Nahel M. The French President Emmanuel Macron has postponed a state visit to Germany due to begin tomorrow because of the unrest. French reporter Antonine André says the recent riots have nothing to do with wanting justice.
French people is more and more upset against these rioters, and that's a point which is good for Emmanuel Macron, because everybody now thinks it's enough. We have to stop them, and there is nothing to do with justice. It's not a question of justice. It's just to put chaos and to robbery and to steal upon a false political cause.
Well, British travellers are also being warned their movements could be restricted due to the protests, but travel expert Simon Calder believes it still is safe for now.
If it starts spreading, if it gets in towards the tourist areas, and bear in mind that France is the most popular country in the world for incoming tourists, so therefore tourism essential for them. But similarly, you're in the middle of a beautiful city such as Paris. If this trouble starts coming in from the suburbs, from the banlieue into the centre, that could signal problems.
A 46-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder after a teenager who's now been named by police as Leonardo Reed and a 23-year-old man was stabbed to death in North London. The 15-year-old boy was found with stab wounds in Islington on Thursday. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The 23-year-old died later at a West London hospital. A third victim was also found with stab wounds at an address in North London. His injuries aren't life-threatening. That's an image of Leonardo Reed, the 15-year-old boy. 7 Just Stop Oil protesters have been arrested for disrupting London's Pride March. Activists blocked the road and sprayed paint on a Coca-Cola truck, forcing the parade to stop for over 15 minutes. They were arrested for public nuisance offences. The group says they took action because Pride works with industries complicit in worsening the climate crisis. Meanwhile, 3 members of Animal Rising have scaled a large scaffold in the centre of a track in a bid to prevent a major greyhound racing event. The activists interrupted the Derby final around noon, alleging it will protect the dogs from harm on the track. The race is scheduled to take place at 9:15 this evening. Jeremy Clarkson's column about the Duchess of Sussex, published in The Sun, was found to be sexist by the press regulator. The former Top Gear star wrote that he dreamed of Meghan Markle being paraded naked through British towns and publicly shamed. More than 25,000 complaints were filed, the most ever received by the Independent Press Standards Organisation. Ipsos said the article was humiliating and degrading, but it rejected suggestions it was racist, inaccurate, or harassed the Duchess. The senior detective who survived an attempted murder in Northern Ireland was given a standing ovation at an awards ceremony last night.
The Chief Inspector, John Caldwell.
DCI John Caldwell, who received the Special Recognition Prize, thanked his family for their support as he spoke publicly. For the first time, the detective was seriously injured when he was shot by dissident Republicans in Omagh in February. He said he was sorry children had to witness the horrors of the attack. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak presented his award via video link, describing DCI Caldwell as a true hero.
It's a real pleasure to present the Spirit of Northern Ireland's Special Recognition Award this evening to someone that I admire hugely, a policeman, a father, a husband, a football coach, a man who, when his own life was in danger, was still thinking of others.
Households are being urged to take an energy meter reading today, and time is running out as the new price cap comes into force. Regulator Ofgem says the average price people can be charged has fallen to just over £2,000. However, bills are still much higher than they were 2 years ago. And iced coffee drinks from high street chains can contain exceptionally high amounts of sugar, which consumer company Which finding many are sweeter than a Mars bar or a can of Coca-Cola. It compared frappes and frappuccinos from Starbucks, Caffè Nero and Costa. And one of the unhealthiest options was a Starbucks caramel frappuccino. It contains 48.5 grams of sugar. That's equivalent to 12 teaspoons, which is nearly 20 grams more than the daily amount recommended by the NHS. TV online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News. Now it's back over to Neil.
What are the essentials of life, of your life? Among those most important to me, those I would not willingly live without, are family, the right to protect that family, as well as freedom from oppression, especially the oppression of the state. A freedom to which I used to give next to no thought at all, however, has now risen through the ranks to become for me among the most important of all. That freedom is the freedom to transact, which is to buy and sell without interference and scrutiny. Without freedom to control our own finances, we are, and this is no exaggeration, effectively driven from society. You might say that if we cannot buy or sell on our own terms, that we are transformed into non-persons. In this modern Western world of ours, the freedom to transact is bound up inescapably with the right to have a bank account. Deprived of that everyday commonplace technicality, we cannot function in the myriad ways necessary to maintain modern existence. Without a bank account, we cannot receive a salary, we cannot pay our bills, we cannot obtain or service a mortgage or lease a car, we can't borrow money. In an increasingly cashless society, we can't even buy a loaf of bread. The list of impossibles or next to impossibles born of no bank account is long. To be deprived of a bank account is to be the victim of social murder. At the very least, it is a modern-day equivalent of excommunication, of exile. Last week, my fellow GB News presenter Nigel Farage revealed that the bank of which he has been a customer for decades has told him it's closing his accounts, that it wants nothing more to do with him. The same stricture has apparently been applied not only to Nigel, but to some of his family. Believe it or believe it not, but Nigel Farage is now the third person I know personally who has been treated thus by the banking industry in recent months. I'm also already aware of other private citizens of this country, apparently law-abiding tax-paying citizens, some in the public eye and the majority definitely not, who have been similarly dealt with. If you look on at this behaviour by banks and console yourself that such cannot and will not happen to you and yours on account of your good people and no trouble to the state, then I urge you to think again. What can happen to anyone may sooner or later happen to everyone. When it comes to governments, that which they can do, they certainly will do. I struggle to believe this is where we are now. The social strangulation of those deemed beyond the pale for whatever reason, those identified as having been critical of the mainstream state-sponsored narrative, a malevolent and sinister behaviour in the playbook of repressive, dictatorial, authoritarian regimes is apparently standard practice here in the Britain that was once great, but that is great no longer. This treatment is being meted out to Nigel Farage, not just to make life impossible for him, but, I say, pour encourager les autres. It is a warning to one and all that holding and espousing views counter to those favoured by the authorities will no longer be tolerated. In the hive mind of the Borg-like collective that is the uniparty, totalitarian regime towards which we are being marched, the drones are to be left in no doubt that resistance is futile. As sinister as any other aspect of all this is the realisation the whip is in the hand of the corporations. Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum calls this, euphemistically, stakeholder capitalism. What it means is that the decisions that matter are made not by governments, but by big business. And big business is answerable only to its owners, owners who long ago decided that borders and sovereign individuals are inconvenient. So far so bureaucratic, but simply put, they're messing with us, those ideologues and their sock puppets. Indeed, diligently and perversely, they're finding every last way to mess with us. There are multiple motives for this messing with us, but the most important is the intention to divide, to set individual against individual, tribe against tribe. Always the aim is to have us at each other's throats, so we overlook the malevolence coming from the state. Look at what we're being bullied into accepting as normal thought and action, and at what we are told to reject as wrongthink. Being protective of family and children is deemed wrongthink. Being an advocate of freedom is labelled right-wing, as if right-wing even means anything anymore, which it doesn't, being no more than mud for slinging. Approving of Brexit, just being ambivalent about Brexit, is deemed wrongthink. Knowing there are only two sexes and that change from one to the other is impossible is wrongthink. To declare Christian faith is infinitely more likely to attract condemnation than claiming women have penises. Elsewhere, it seems we are to accept men stripping off and dancing near naked or in bondage gear among gatherings of children. A march for Pride Month in New York City last week was underscored by the chanting of "We're here, we're queer, we're coming for your children." Why would any adult think that an appropriate thing to say? Once upon a time, in the movie adaptation of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, the child catcher, complete with giant net, was only a fairy tale terror, also the stuff of nightmares. As recently as 2008, the child catcher was voted among the 50 most vile movie villains by Entertainment Weekly. In 2023, a generation of children might be invited to contemplate the child catcher for real, out there in the street and coming closer. Reclaim Party MP Andrew Bridgen sought to initiate a bill to ensure schools would inform parents if their children were identifying as the opposite sex, what they call social transitioning, perhaps embarking on the road that ends in the removal of genitals and breasts. A majority of MPs of all stripes struck Bridgen's effort down before it could get out of the starting blocks. Labour MP Ben Bradshaw described Bridgen's intentions, which is to say letting parents know if their children are living alternative lives at school, as despicable. Despicable. That parents should be kept informed about their children's lives can be described as despicable by a sitting MP, and that his comment is loudly approved by a majority of his ilk. It's where we are now in this shadowland of Britain. Despicable was a noteworthy choice of words, given that Bradshaw's use of it came soon after a teacher at Rye College in East Sussex used the same while trying to humiliate and silence a young girl who refused to accept a fellow pupil's decision to identify as a cat. Bradshaw sought to dismiss Bridgen as a conspiracy theorist, despite the ever-growing number of young people coming forward to express bitter regret at having been coaxed and or encouraged by adults through a process that left them mutilated, sterilised and condemned to shortened, lesser lives at increased risk of persistent infections. Underneath all of it is the message that when it comes to the children, it's the state and not the parents that have the final say. In so many ways that matter, the children are already caught. This is where we are now, apparently, in a world where one wrong word can see a person exiled to a life made impossible in any modern sense. A world where the messing with children's bodies, with our minds and with our understanding of right and wrong is nothing less than sadistic, shaped and choreographed as it is to cut people loose from their moorings and set them adrift upon an ocean of uncertainty. If you fear that you no longer know which way is up, then I invite you to join the club. The messing is an all-encompassing, increasingly polluting every aspect of everyday life. I read last week about how the government of the Netherlands has in recent years authorised the euthanising of otherwise healthy young people, people whose only dissatisfactions were autism or some other intellectual challenge. This is the same Netherlands where farmers are being driven off their land to make way for the mega-city building plans of more of those stakeholder capitalist transnational corporations. The same Netherlands where homeowners can now be coerced to sell their homes only to people with a low to medium income, which is to say the government decides who you might sell your home to and at what price. More and more, the Netherlands appears to be a petri dish for the conducting of all manner of experiments in social engineering. And what happens there, anywhere, might happen elsewhere and then everywhere. The West, in the form of NATO, driven full tilt by the US and the UK, pursues a forever war in Ukraine, shoveling hundreds of billions of dollars, pounds and euros into government coffers there in the name of defending democracy. In Ukraine, democracy manifests itself now in the government's banning of opposition parties, the shutting down and criminalising of dissenting media, the jailing of a political rival and the raiding of orthodox churches. Ukraine may not be the most corrupt country on earth, but in terms of many metrics, it's definitely in the top one. I invite you to contemplate a grim but nonetheless revealing truth that the powers that be, the state, whatever, as well as those populating the institutions, those driving the mainstream media, have absolutely no option but to keep driving their inversion of society. For a period of time hard to quantify, but let's imagine it in terms of many decades at least, a campaign of lying and plundering practised upon the many by the few, has delivered those lying thieves to a point where if the many realised the extent of the wrongdoing, then the consequences would be colourful to say the least. Sharks must keep swimming forward or they drown. Everyone smiles at the happy ending of It's a Wonderful Life, all but destroyed by the villainous banker, Mr. Potter. Small-town good man George Bailey is saved in the end by the customers of his struggling building and loan, a community bank that has sought only to enable those customers to live decent lives. Saved also by the people of the town who love him. We smile and cry at the end of the story because we know it's rightful, the reassertion of the rightful order of things after time spent in a wrongful alternative. In the world George Bailey briefly wished for and got, a world in which he had never been born, all was wrong, upside down and inside out. His own children didn't exist because he had never existed. We're being presented with that inverted, darkened world now, tricked into thinking it has to be real. If it seems like a nightmare, then all we have to do is wake up. If we don't, then Zuzu's petals are gone forever. Joining me tonight, the journalist and presenter Jasmine Birtles. Jasmine, first and foremost, you're a financial advisor. What do you make? How do you interpret what was done with Nigel Farage in the week?
I think it's shocking, but it's not new. This has been going on for a while. In fact, I wrote an article last year about various organisations that had been cancelled. You had the Free Speech Union and also the charity Us For Them UK, which were cancelled by PayPal. Citizen Go, which is against abortion, was cancelled by the bank Wise. There were a couple of very right-wing individuals, I can't remember their names, who were cancelled by Santander. Even the vlog Trigonometry was cancelled for a short time. Mm-hmm. So this is something that's happening more than regularly nowadays. And as you say, there are people that are not well known who are getting this against them, and it's entirely political because I mean, when you think, most banks have all sorts of people on their books, including murderers, rapists, fraudsters. They're quite happy to have that, but somebody whose political views they're not keen on suddenly is not wanted. And at the moment, the establishment is kind of left, media establishment, the establishment generally, civil service, they're kind of left of centre, so they're going for the right. But at some point, a few years' time, it'll switch again and it'll be the left-wingers who are attacked as well.
I know you're not a lawyer, but it jumped out at me that surely there had to be some form of unlawfulness about a government standing by while a law-abiding, tax-paying citizen was made a non-person by a corporate entity. I mean, I know you could say, it's a private business, they can do what they like.
Well, yes.
This is not just being barred from a pub or put out of a supermarket.
It's a good point. And we kind of discussed this back in 2008 when the banks failed, or looked like they were about to fail. Some of them did. Because I'd grown up thinking it was just a human right that you have a bank account. Apparently it's not, because they are, as you say, they're companies. You'll remember Tony Benn, Wedgwood Benn, he wanted to have a government-run bank, and we had it apparently for a short time, which then turned into Alliance and Leicester, which then was bought out by Santander, etc. It didn't work, but it could have done, I think, and it might have been a better idea. There are alternatives. That's one of the good things now. There are some alternatives. So, for example, there's a bank account called tallymoney.com, and that's all based on gold. Everything is invested in gold. And I know, because I've spoken to them, they said, whoever comes along, they'll talk to whoever,
Well, they say that now.
Yes, they say true.
Until there's some form of guarantee, in whatever form.
Yes.
You could find yourself exiled by a corporate entity that doesn't like the cut of your jib, and that's it.
Absolutely. It's absolutely right. And this is the problem when you have a sort of a mass wokery at the moment, where all the businesses have people, I think it's people in their 20s and 30s who've decided they don't like anybody who's pro-Brexit, they don't like anybody who's anti-abortion, they don't like anybody who's, as you've mentioned, Christian. You know, all of these sort of areas, they're very unhappy, particularly if they're outspoken about something. And this does have to be removed because it's simply not right to have that. If they're a criminal, that's another thing.
Simply not right is a line I like and understand. We're on a break already, after which Ralph Scholhammer will be here to talk about what exactly is going on in the Netherlands and across Europe at the moment in so many ways. Don't go anywhere.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Now, I spoke earlier about how I'm convinced we're being messed with, pure and simple, by those above us in the food chain, from seizure of land in the Netherlands to the closure of bank accounts of private citizens here in Britain, to the trans debate. Has the world been driven mad? Here to contemplate all of that and more is Ralph Scholhammer, Professor of Political Science at Webster University in Vienna. It's great to have you here, Ralph.
Thank you so much for having me, Neil.
No, a pleasure. Now, you and I have spoken before, and I am very aware of what's happening in the Netherlands. First of all, the land grab for the farmers. Now this experiment with how people might sell their homes. Are the Netherlands being used as some sort of lab for social engineering experiments. Why is it all happening there?
I don't think it's all happening there. I think what we see in the Netherlands is, particularly with the farmers' protests, it got more attention than in other places. But you see these things happening elsewhere as well. There is, I mean, I find this almost hilarious. As you just mentioned, right, there's this idea that the government makes a law and says you want to sell your house and you kind of have to sell it to somebody, from a specific socioeconomic background. But while they are planning this, in Brussels, the EU is working on a new kind of idea and device to make homes more energy efficient. They want them to be like twice as energy efficient by 2033. And in many cases, this means renovations that are going to cost, 70, 80,000 pounds. So even if you want to sell your home, right, they say you cannot sell it to somebody who, can afford it. But even those who want to buy are now saying, well, but I'm going to have to invest 80,000 pounds for renovations in 10 years. So I'm not going to pay you full price unless either you do the renovations or you use the price for this. So you, again, create an artificial housing shortage because those who want to buy are going to say, we wait. Those who are going to sell are going to say, we wait. And then can you create an artificial crisis that then is going to be used, right, for yet another regulation, right? And then they're going to say, well, then people who have apartments that they're not used, they have to rent them. They have to sell them. So it always comes back to a power grab in all these areas.
And isn't it the case that this only applies to properties up to €355,000? So, handily, entirely coincidentally, I'm sure, that means that the houses belonging to most of the people in power won't be affected.
As always, right? That's it's like with inflation adaptation, these things, right? In Brussels, you always have these adaptations that they're safe. Or just to give you another example, we are told to be aware of climate change and emissions. The EU Parliament has two parliaments, right? Because the Belgians and the French could not decide where to put it. So they're going to go back and forth. And we are told, well, you should take the bus, you shouldn't fly, right? You shouldn't have a car.
Is there an end game? You say there's been more attention paid to the Netherlands, but it's actually elsewhere and everywhere, some of this. Is there a coherent, however unwanted, end game to all of this social engineering that's going on?
This is something where we might slightly disagree, because and I'm not sure if I'm right or wrong on this, to be honest. But one idea is, right, that there's a plan, right? There's a structure behind it. My probably a little bit more frustrating sense is that they really are incompetent, right? They're incompetent at solving the bigger issues. I mean, just an example, if you look at France at the moment, they pretty much botched everything they could. Energy, immigration, the economy, so everything. So they now start to want to manage the smaller and smaller and smaller details of our lives because they think that they can do, right? It's something you are uncovered not to be capable of doing something. So you want to do ever more and more to finally prove how good you actually are. So I think it's a combination of that they overestimate themselves, yet they have a certain incompetence.
But is it possible to be that incompetent all the time? I mean, even a stopped clock tells the right time twice a day. You'd think every now and again they would get something big wrong.
Well, I give you one example. The main person, Joseph Borrell, right, the main person responsible for the foreign policy of the European Union, recently mixed up Russia and Serbia, right? So that tells you, I think, all you have to know. This man has, a cabinet, a staff that we could just dream of. And they apparently either cannot brief him, or he doesn't read the briefings, or he doesn't care. So my argument is, you're right, the clock is at least right twice a day. With the bureaucracy in Brussels, I'm not sure if they have such a successful track record.
One thing that I was thinking, though, talking about is there a plan or is it just incompetence? It feels to me like a bit of a mix because I think, it seems to me that there are people with some sort of a plan. Some of it comes through the World Economic Forum, which I think is a bit like bringing in Mackenzie's into your business to basically ruin it, because that's what these consultants tend to do. So you've got this plan. They're telling some ideas to various people in power. And then the people in power try to implement this, but do it very badly. Or the idea was very bad in the first place.
But I think that's absolutely right? Because if you have these conditions that we just described, it opens the door for all kinds of grifters and those who kind of want to piggyback off these agendas. And I mean, Klaus Schwab, he's either this kind of quote-unquote evil genius, or he's the world's most successful grifter. Right? That kind of, he just jumped on this bandwagon and he's basically, sometimes I wonder, like when he's at home with his family, I mean, they must at some point think, like, this can't be real, right? Everything they publish is more absurd. Like, I think the most recent piece they had is that I think we have to halve the number of available cars on the planet by half in the next, I think, 50 or 25 years. That's madness. It's never going to happen.
We were speaking earlier, Jasmine, about what happened to colleague Nigel Farage having his bank account shut down. How would you read that as a practice by these whatever stakeholder capitalists that as Klaus Schwab describes them? What are they? What kind of shot across the bows for the general population is that?
I think that's a very serious issue. I think that's much more dangerous than we think. And we saw something similar, if you guys remember, with the truckers in Canada, right? Exactly. Where they had the GoFundMe thing, and all of a sudden GoFundMe said, well, we're not going to give them the money, we give it to something that we think charity should go to. So imagine this, you donate to a cause, right? And then the organization says, thank you so much, Jasmine, for what you gave us, but we're going to give it to somebody else. But if you debank someone, right, you cannot participate in life anymore, right? No ATM, no credit card. Your business, we no longer exchange cash for services, right? You cannot transfer money. This is very dangerous. And I think like banks and private companies, they kind of play along to get along. And we see what governments do, right? They don't make it up, but they lean on you. They say, well, you know, this person seems a little bit unsavvy, so maybe you shouldn't do business with them. And it's kind of the unspoken part is or else.
But also with CBDC, central bank digital currencies, they don't even have to do that. They can do what they do in China. You know, if they don't like what you've just been saying, they go, oh, you are a criminal. You can't have a bank account. You can't have, you can't buy a ticket. You can't anything like that.
It is that, isn't it? It's this. It's the ESG. It's the incoming of the Chinese social credit system by any other name.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
It's your behaviour being monitored with consequences attached.
Exactly right. As you say, if you're a criminal, I think we could have a conversation about that. Exactly. But I think it's going to be things like you hold the wrong opinion, right? You go to a store and you buy a bottle of wine, and all of a sudden it says, you know, you bought the bottle of wine, but you also yesterday donated, you know, to some cause that we don't think is worth donating to. Yes. So I kind of was more optimistic about this, but in the realm of currency, what's going to happen, I find this a very, very dangerous development.
Because for me, the freedom to transact trumps almost every other.
And like you, I never used to question it. You know, you just assumed, well, you know, that's my right. But no, it is being eroded. And I think a lot of people are beginning to realise this, which is why we're seeing cash being used a lot more, certainly in this country.
Jasmine, I'm being told we're out of time on this. We're always out of time on everything. Ralph, thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a conversation.
Great meeting you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Go elsewhere. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Coming up, we'll be chatting to ethicist Dr. Callum Miller after an investigation found medical professionals in the Netherlands have been euthanising autistic and intellectually disabled people. Don't go away, like Ralph just...
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions, and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio, and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fun.
Welcome back. It's my contention that the people of the West are being nudged into line with an ideology, an unbending and intolerant ideology. The more I watch and read, the more questions I have. Here to answer some of them is medical doctor, ethicist and philosopher Dr. Callum Miller. Thank you for coming in, Callum.
Thank you.
I sense the people of the West are increasingly unhappy, rattling with antidepressants and anxieties of one sort or another. What say you?
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen mental health problems explode over the last few decades for a whole number of reasons. It's very complex. There's no one single cause. But, you know, when you look at the mental health of young people in particular, it's just gone, you know, hugely downhill over the last few decades. And it's very concerning. And, of course, there are many things in society which we could be doing to help, but we're refusing to do because it might be politically inconvenient or whatever reasons. And in some ways, we're making it much, much worse.
What would those things be that could readily improve the situation?
So I think, you know, social media is a hugely important contributing factor and limiting young people's access to social media. I don't know exactly how to do that, but, you know, clearly giving them smartphones when they're 5 years old and telling them to go on Instagram is not going to help very much. And then, you know, as we're here to talk about today, there's this issue where instead of trying to solve those problems and figure out solutions to mental health difficulties, we're basically telling them to give up. We're basically saying, if your life's that bad, actually, maybe you should kill yourself. And so, yeah, very concerning.
Absolutely. I mean, that's antithetical. Yeah. That's against the human species. If you're encouraging people who are going through a bad patch just to take an injection or a pill and call it quits, where are we as a species?
It's literally inhumane, isn't it? I mean, it's literally, as you say, saying to people, your life is not worth it. You as a human being are not worth it. Just kill yourself. Whether you're a bit unhappy or very unhappy, or as in the case in Canada, poor. I mean, Canada's gone bananas on.
Or in the Netherlands, autistic. What moral, ethical justification is there for that?
I don't think there really is any good justification. I mean, what you normally find with euthanasia is either you go the whole way and just say anyone who wants to kill themselves can kill themselves, and that's completely fine. And of course, you know, some people think that's okay because it's about autonomy. So they say, if you want to kill yourself, kill yourself. Now, I've worked in psychiatry. I know that when people try to commit suicide, we can usually help them. And that's, of course, the humane thing to do. We wouldn't even dream, I think, in most settings to encourage them and say, that's the right choice, go ahead. And yet there's this huge move in society, increasingly in the medical profession, to say, actually, it is that bad. And now you mentioned the issue of disability. The alternative to just saying anyone can kill themselves is to set up a sort of two-tier system, a sort of class system, where we say to the people who are healthy or who don't have a terminal disability or whatever, actually, your life is worth preserving and you shouldn't be allowed to kill yourself because your life is worth it. But if you have a disability, if you're autistic, maybe if you have Down syndrome, you have a learning difficulty, actually, in that case, you should kill yourself. That really is the reality. They won't say it like that, but that is what we're seeing in places like Canada, Netherlands, Belgium, all over.
And you cannot help but invoke the notion of eugenics, that you are, one way or another, suggesting that there's a desirable human being and an undesirable human being, and that we should winnow the one away from the other.
Absolutely. I mean, I didn't want to say it first, but since you mentioned it, it's, you know, in a world where we're so acutely hypersensitive to Nazism, and, you know, you get called a Nazi just for believing in biology these days. What's remarkable is that when there are actually things that literally are what the Nazis did, like killing disabled people, you know, people are all for it. I mean, not everyone's for it, certainly. Most palliative care doctors, I think 90% are against euthanasia. So there's significant resistance within many parts of society, particularly the medical profession. But like you say, you know, one of the ways the Nazis desensitized themselves to the ending of human life was they started with disabled people. They had a huge euthanasia campaign. And it was precisely because of that that we brought in this human rights framework that says everyone has the right to life, which must be protected.
In an increasingly secular, atheist Western society, do you think wokeism is becoming a kind of a parasite zombie alternative to religion? Something for people to obey and potentially worship?
I think so. I mean, it has all the hallmarks of religion. You see in terms of, you know, the taboos, the stigmas, things you're not allowed to say, things that count as blasphemy. You know, we've got rid of blasphemy laws and we've reintroduced hate speech laws, which is basically the same thing with a different God. You know, we have festivals to the religions, we have high priests that you can't criticize, we have, you know, strict rules and regulations that you get cancelled if you sin. I mean, it really is, I think humans are innately religious people. It's just some people worship a supernatural God and some people worship something
an ideology.
in the world. So, yeah, absolutely.
One of my problems with euthanasia has always been kind of the Miss Marple element of it, really, that you have an elderly relative who's not 100% maybe, and it's very easy, particularly if they've got all sorts of money, for their relatives to help them, you know, on the way, saying, well, it's what she would have wanted. And I think once you go over the line of enabling anybody with any issue to kill themselves or be killed, there's nothing to stop you, really, honestly, after that.
But don't you there's also, as in so many cases, where a state is benign, you might make the case that you would have a freedom to do whatever you want. But states are never benign, and there's always an agenda or an ideology. And if getting rid of undesirable people is part of that ideology, then anyone and everyone is at risk.
Well, what I often say about this topic in particular is most people who support bringing in a euthanasia do it from good motivations. I don't actually doubt that. I think there are many things that people want to bring in for bad reasons. Euthanasia, I think, is mostly well-intentioned. But the problem is that it's so easily hijacked, and that's the issue. You know, when you bring in euthanasia, it's inevitable that there will be economic reasons for it in future. We know that in Oregon, a significant proportion of people have euthanasia just because they cite financial reasons. In Canada, you know, like you say, some people are said it to in hospital, we can't afford to give you a cancer treatment, but we can offer you euthanasia. And, you know, people, like you say, being euthanized because they can't get the right welfare support. So, absolutely.
And also, isn't there an issue of organ harvesting as well? I mean, this is a very, very worrying thing, that if, you know, healthy but maybe mentally unstable people are offered euthanasia, a fabulous amount of organs to harvest. I mean, again,
kidneys.
Money again.
Well, exactly. I mean, in a society which is ageing, which will have worse economic problems because of ageing, the simple economic solution is just to kill all the old people. Of course, that's horrendous when we say it that way, but that's what's going on.
Run out of time again, Callum. As I warned you coming in, we're always pushed for time, but that's
always the way.
such a huge topic that we must continue this conversation, take another opportunity later on. But thank you for coming in today, Callum. Coming up, as the RSPCA are warning snake owners to be wary of their pets escaping in the hot weather, we have our very own snake in the studio. Don't go anywhere.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
And action.
Sergeant Reed, my superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, you surely haven't failed to notice the many ways in which we're being trained to fear warm weather, from weather maps coloured red to black and extreme weather warnings if it's warm enough to get our shorts on. Now we're being told that if the warm weather keeps up, we can expect to see more snakes. I kid you not, here to confirm or deny the suggestion is Sue Coleman, who on social media goes by the name Snaky Sue. Hi, Sue.
Hi, Neil.
And come on, who's this wondrous individual?
This is Rezi, and she's a Brazilian rainbow boa.
What an absolutely stunning manifestation.
She's beautiful.
She really is beautiful. How can you tell if you, or is that a rude question, that it's a she? I wouldn't know. I couldn't tell the difference between a male and a female.
It's difficult when they're young.
Right.
The males have a slightly different length of tail.
Right, OK.
But then sometimes I've measured them and, you know, the female and the male tail is the same sort of size.
It's not an exact science.
Yeah, no, it's not. You can probe them, but I don't like doing it.
No, I wouldn't know.
Is there any basis to this story? Are people going to encounter more snakes in the warmer weather? And if so, why?
Well, if they're wild snakes, that's because they're coming out, they're maybe getting too hot, feeling too hot. But then if they're feeling too hot, normally they would hide in a cool place. So if they're snakes that people have lost, it's quite possible that they've got hot in the vivariums, and so they've done their best to escape because they're like Houdinis. Mm-hmm. They can flatten their bodies. It's just backbone and rib cage, so they can flatten their bodies and squeeze through any gaps.
And I suppose owners, rightly or wrongly, might think my snake should be out there enjoying the sunshine and then lose control of the animal when it's out on the lawn.
That's possible as well.
Are there a lot of snakes like yours in Britain? Is there a society for snake owners, for example?
There are. I mean, there's the IHS, International Herpetological Society, but not really. I've rescued snakes since 1996 and taken in people's unwanted pet snakes and rehomed them.
Yeah.
Will Rezi come to me?
Yeah, if you want her.
I
would
very much like to have a brief encounter. Wow. Gosh, she's a real weight.
Yeah, she's quite
really
size.
Substantial, yeah.
Not as big as some of my snakes, but...
do people have anything to fear from an animal like Rezi?
No. I mean, you just have to respect them, because if she was lost and she's going to be frightened...
Yes.
So if you were going to go towards her, just put a cover over their face.
OK.
And then pick them up. You know, once you've got a cover, maybe wear some gloves, just pick them up from behind like this. Once you have them, they'll be sort of aiming away and you just handle them like this.
Interesting.
Now-
Or, you know, if you find a small one, you can put a bucket over it.
Now that people have had all manner of pet snakes for many, many years, are there any alien species established in Britain now that wouldn't naturally be here?
No, there's the Aesculapian snake, but I think this is years back in Wales. There's like a little group of Aesculapian snakes, which I think come from Italy. They're the ones that they use for the rod, you know, the healing rod.
The symbol of health.
Yeah, the symbol of health.
For physicians, yes. OK.
Oh, what about though if people do have snakes, and we've heard a lot about people taking on dogs, and well, no, particularly dogs during lockdown, and then suddenly they realise they can't look after them.
Yeah.
Is a snake a lot to look after? Because I would have thought you just feed it once a day and leave it.
You don't feed them. You can feed them once a month, but the thing is neglect. It's easy to neglect them.
Okay.
They're in a box, and you know it's all exciting at the beginning, and then like you know, when people say, "Oh, it started biting me," I say, "Well, you stopped handling it. You have to handle them, say once a month. It's not a lot, but
Would you like
but
to
it's
bring
easy
her
to neglect them."
I'll bring her to you.
Hello. Oh, thank you. Hello, lovely. Who's a lovely one?
It's the weight
It is,
of them
yes.
that's impressive.
I mean,
He
if
wants to go to
snakes are
Mum.
escaping, people really do need to have a thermometer in the vivarium so they can tell the temperature. You need to know, because we've got habitats, but you need to have a thermometer to tell.
Realistically, even with our native snakes, sort of grass snakes and even adders, we're not really going to face any kind of problem with wild snakes, are we? However warm it gets.
No.
Look at...
Wants to go in the sofa.
What are you letting her do?
Is Resi at full size?
Yeah,
or...
yeah, she's...
Right.
I've had her 13 years and she was already an adult when I took her in.
Right. So
Wonderful.
she poses the greatest threat to something, what, maybe the size of a rat, a mouse?
A rat.
But people are so afraid of snakes. They've had a bad rap. Let's be honest.
They do.
Yeah.
They're actually therapeutic.
Are they?
And
Yes.
over the years of taking them out to meet people, I've sort of found this out by people actually saying it to me. They've said, "Oh, they're so therapeutic," because all the person is thinking of at the moment they have the snake is she okay? Am I handling her properly? And all other worries go out of your head. You're
Right,
just caring
yes.
about this creature that you know nothing about.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, is she all right? Well, am I hurting her? Is it, you know?
She's nice to stroke. Does she feel that? Does she feel being stroked?
You mentioned that's the species from Italy, the
Aesculapian snake.
Aesculapian. That's bound up with a lot of mythology and religious idealism, isn't it?
Yeah.
So Aesculapius, it would be after the god of medicine, as you say. So it was Aesculapius.
But it's all bound up with worship of them, and there's quite a lot.
They have this festival, don't they, of snakes, Aesculapian snakes, and they all go.
So before people develop, or well, you know, people mostly think about snakes, I suppose, and feel quite, you know, alarmed by the prospect. But there was another time and in other places where they have been absolutely central to people's understanding of health
Asia,
and the rest.
In Asia, they're cared for religiously. They're allowed to roam in certain, religious areas and looked after.
Like cows, perhaps, in India.
Yeah.
But so in the Christian religion, of course, snakes don't do very well.
They get a bad rap.
Absolutely, very bad rap. But the positive element of snakes is wisdom. So you know, from a positive view, they represent wisdom in the Bible. But much of the time, it's devilish. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, the idea that the snake spoke to Eve, they don't have any vocal cords.
They don't. They can't speak.
So this is a completely different serpent.
It's a mythological one there.
I just think that, on the contrary, to be keeping away from them, more people, as many people as possible, should get a real experience of these animals. Because I think if you've been properly in their presence, they are quite wonderful.
Yes.
I used to do so many schools when I lived in London. Many schools, scouting groups.
We're running out of time, Sue. We're going to have to hold that thought. That's it for this week. My thanks to Snaky Sue and to all my guests, especially Jasmine.
Thank you.
Next up, Common Sense Crusade with Calvin Robinson. I'll see you next week.
Hello there. Welcome to your GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. I'm Craig Snell. Well, looking ahead to Sunday, it's a bit of a north-south split across the country. Many southern areas should be largely dry with some good spells of sunshine, but across the north, it remains pretty changeable. And it's all down to this area of low pressure, which is not really going to go very far over the next few days. And note that the tightly packed isobars indicating it's going to be a fairly blustery 24 hours. So as we end Saturday, fairly quiet end to the day across many southern areas, but across the north, further showers moving in on a fairly keen wind. Some persistent rain continuing across Shetland and Orkney, and here actually the winds will strengthen further as the night goes on, certainly the risk of some gales as we start Sunday morning. But for all of us, temperatures generally staying in double figures. So Sunday starts off with plenty of sunshine across the south, and it really remains that way for most of the day. Some fair weather cloud bubbling up from time to time. Northern areas, a mixture of sunny spells and scattered showers, but again, note across parts of Orkney and northern Scotland we remain cloudy with some persistent rain really carrying on right throughout the course of the day. But in the sunshine across the south, feeling pleasantly warm, highs reaching 22, 23 degrees. Little changes as we move into Sunday night. Fairly quiet across the south, but further rain or showers across the north, again being blown in on a fairly keen wind. And for Orkney and Shetland and the far north of Scotland, that rain just persisting right throughout the night. And that, in fact, it will remain that way as we go into Monday itself. Elsewhere, a bright start to the day, but cloud will begin to spill in across many western areas with some outbreaks of rain arriving here as the afternoon goes on. But the best of the driest and brightest conditions really reserved in the afternoon down towards the southeastern part of the country. And really, the start of next week remains unsettled for all of us.
On Mark Dolan tonight, in My Big Opinion, meddling monarch King Charles signs up to climate hysteria by switching on an emergency global warming clock.